Once again, good morning. Happy Friday. Thanks for joining another session of Azure Power Lunch. And let me share my screen. Go. So, as I said in the email, our topic of discussion today is Azure AKS Updates. Um, as you know, we always cover updates, different Azure updates in the beginning of our call. But this service, I mean, like all other services, they're continuously evolving. There are new features being added, uh, updates being made, things like that. So uh, I want to just focus on this particular service this week to identify some of the key features and updates that have been made, which will go a long way as we progress to help your customers or help, if you are a customer on this call, help enterprises to make it more secure and, more robust and things like that. So, if you don't know me, here's a quick blurb about myself. And this is, the topic is wrong. It's Azure AKS. Um, so just a quick um, background. If you're not familiar with AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service, we call it Managed Kubernetes, and I'm going to call it, as we write, it's like K8. So just to save time, I'm going to abbreviate. I'm going to say it's a Managed K8 service. So what is K8? It's an industry leading orchestrator. What's an orchestrator? Basically, we all know about containers. They are virtualization on top of OS, and you can have, you know, multiple containers uh, for an application, but then you have to make sure that you bring different applications up, how these applications talk to each other, how you manage their life cycle. They're running on different VMs, how you manage if one of those VM goes down. So all of these things are part of orchestration. So that's what an orchestrator does. And by far, uh, K8 is the most popular and the orchestrator which is gaining the most traction in the industry. Moving forward, what is AKS? What is managed Azure Kubernetes Service? So Azure Kubernetes Service, what it does is it provides you a platform. So instead of building a managed Kubernetes platform, so what does it mean? It means that you don't have to install um, all of these things on your VMs and worry about installing all that software. What it does for you is it sets up a cluster and it sets up management node or management plane for that cluster. And basically, management plane is a part of Azure. You don't pay for it. You only pay for the nodes where your workload is running. So just once again, a quick backgrounder in Kubernetes, when you're running a cluster, there are one or more than one master nodes. And these master nodes are basically kind of, puppet master. They are managing all the worker nodes where your actual worker containers are running. So what this management plane in Azure does, first of all, you don't pay for it. Second, it kind of provides you kind of a managed management plane to orchestrate your nodes in the worker nodes, and you don't have to worry about updating, patching of all of these system. You just bring in your application, run in on this managed Kubernetes service, and that's what kind of make it very interesting. And sometime a question comes like, is it a PaaS service or is it a IaaS service? I will say depending on where you look at it, it's a PaaS service because it's kind of managed, but at the same time you can see all the VM scale set running underneath, so it's an IaaS service. So, but that's a debate for another time. Folks, one request: if you are not asking a question, if you can please mute your phone, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to. Uh, so this is some of the things that it does. Basically, you have this managed plane, managed K8 plane that lives in Azure, and then you have these containers that are running in your VMs. These are your worker nodes. Um, and of course, it provides some of the capabilities, basically a serverless K8 cluster. So we have an offering called Virtual Kubelet with in conjunction with Azure Container Instances, you can have a zero node cluster. So what happens is whenever you want to spin up um, an application, it takes advantage of our Azure Container Instances and spin up those containers in the Azure Container Instance. So you don't have any infrastructure running. So you don't have to worry about, okay, I do have to have these VM nodes running for my application. They're basically dynamically created for you, and that's how you kind of dynamic scaling, and you don't have to pay when you're not running any application. Okay, so that's a quick backgrounder. Any questions? Okay, so the three areas that we're going to be focusing on is the identity. Second one, uh, the network communication. And the third one, we will see if we can get to it, is around policy. So first of all, in terms of identity. So one, if you are creating this Azure AKS cluster, one thing that you first come across that you have to um, create the a service principal. Okay, and that service principal is automatically created depending on how you are. I mean, if you're going through the user interface, it is automatically created. But service principal are hard to manage, and there are some security concerns because you have to have a certain privilege or permission in Azure AD to create those service principal. And certain large organizations and enterprises have real heartburn about how they are being used. They want to audit that, and that kind of and that creates headache for them and headache for people who are using those those these service principle. Okay, so what they have just introduced, went into preview, public preview recently, is a use of managed identity. Okay, so just a quick 1 minute summary of managed identity. What is managed identity? Inherently, it's a wrapper around service principle, make it simpler. Managed identity is tied to, it's of two types. One is user, second is system. What is system managed identity? System managed identity is your service or whatever, let's say your storage account, your web app, it can have an identity, and it is if you just create it, it's or I mean, it can be a system managed where it is its own identity, or user managed where you can assign an identity to it. So that's what uh, and with that identity, it can access resources. So instead of using a service principal and giving access on that behalf, you can directly go in and use that system managed or user managed identity and give it access to that particular application. So it's really, really powerful. Second thing is, second thing is that uh, that it does is it kind of makes it simpler when because it doesn't expire, so it makes it simpler to manage. So now you can create AKS cluster with that managed identity. By the way, it will still create an Azure principal for now in preview, because it needs for some other tasks to use a service principal. But in the future, that service principal will completely go away. So it will create two identities behind the scene. One is a system managed identity to create Kubernetes resources, and second one, a user managed identity where which it will use to access ACR, Azure Container Registry, and all those resources. So, I just want to give a quick disclaimer that this is not a discussion about managed identity. So if you want to know about managed identity, there are resources, very good resources available. You can, definitely take a look, uh, you know, and get to know more about it. But if you have any questions about this particular discussion so far, please feel free to unmute and ask the question.
Hey, this is Len speaking. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, sir.
Good, good. Just a quick question. I didn't have a chance to ask this about the ACI. So whenever we provision the ACI, is it going to land on the same VNet where the AKS
Yes,
resides?
yes, exactly.
Uh-huh. Good. And then also I would presume, yeah, okay, never mind. Thank you. That's a good answer. Thanks
Yeah,
so
yeah.
much.
And by the way, the whole this ACI and networking thing, it's a bit fluid. So there is a preview available where you can create Azure container instances and tie it to a VNet, but that thing is still in preview. The last I know, if it has changed, uh, if anybody knows, please, speak up. But as far as I know, still in preview, because the whole containers and networking, it's a very interesting relationship. It's evolving. So there will be updates in the future on that particular topic, like how you tie containers up in subnets and VNets and so on. So just a you know long-winded answer to your question.
This is Maurice. I have a quick question on those managed entities.
Go ahead.
The user assigned identity, that's really the end user of the system, or is it an application? Because right now what we are trying to do is give identities to application and namespaces. So we don't want a cluster-wide identity, but more kind of per namespace and per application.
Yeah,
Is that what that second one is supposed to be?
that's right. So basically, a user assigned identity, you can create that identity and you can assign it to anything. A system assigned identity will be tied to a particular application. Okay. So with AKS, when you create this AKS, this is talking about a cluster level identity. So not for applications and namespaces. There is an upstream project around pod identities, how pods can use managed identities. That is still, kind of an upstream project, and it's at some point it will make its way into AKS. We don't know when, but that will probably address what you are trying to do.
Okay, great, thanks.
Because in that case, pods will have an identity, and based on that, so for example, your application, you're running a web application, it need to access a key or a connection string from key vault, then it can take that identity, access the key vault, and get back, instead of you having some arbitrary methods to store that identity in that pod itself. Okay. Okay, so just quickly, in terms of documentation, you have to enable preview support. And if, just keep in mind, you don't want to do it in your production subscription, because preview support will be enabled, and you can, for all AKS entities that you create in that subscription. Okay, so you want to do it in a separate subscription, or maybe a test subscription that you are doing. I'm doing it in a subscription that I use for my demos and things like that. So just keep that in mind. It's very well documented, a few steps, and you will create the cluster. So here is, I have created a cluster. Where did it go? Yes, here it is. Okay, no, it is not. So let me just go. I think I deleted one, and let me just show you. Oh yeah, here it is. So this is the cluster that I have created, and it is using managed identity. And how I can find out what identity it is using, I can go in and I can go into user managed identities. Okay, let's see. Managed identities. I can go in here, and here I see this is the identity of my cluster. So this is a user managed identity I talk about. By the way, um, you can go into Azure Active Directory, and you will find those identities there in enterprise applications. Okay, so you can find those identities there as well. So this is a quick blurb about that. Um, let's move on to our. So point is, doesn't sound very interesting right now, but it's gonna be make things really, really simple as we move further, because as they start keep using those managed identities, it's going to make things simpler by taking out service principal, and you will be able to call things on or call application on the behalf of those managed identity, which will make more secure things more robust and more simple. Second thing is secure access to API server. So there is an API server in AKS. That server is part of the management plane. If you are familiar with K8, there is an API server through which it exposes its interface, which is called by kubectl or any tool that control want to access Kubernetes functionality. Okay, this is a part of the management plane, and it has a public API, which once again is a big no-no for some large enterprises. They want to have that on a private um, plane, on a private IP. So basically, or at least they want capability while it is not on the private, available on a private IP address. They want the capability to put a firewall around it to block access to that particular, IP server address from other IP addresses. In order to do that, there is there is a preview available which allows you to block access to your API server. The thing is, it's not as simple because user doesn't control that. It is a part of Azure management plane. So that functionality has to come out from the Azure side. So that's what is available in public preview, where you can go in and enable, basically put restrictions of what IP address can access your um, your that particular API server, which is available on that public IP address. So this is something, once again, it's available in public preview, and with a caveat that this preview will apply to any AKS resources that you create in that subscription. So first of all, you enable this on a subscription, and once it's enabled, it is going to impact all the subscription that you are, all the AKS, you know, subscriptions that you are trying to access. You know, AKS instances that you're trying to create. So once again, you add the preview, you update it, You enable that feature and it will be enabled for all AKS cluster that you create. And that's where you set up AKS authorized IP ranges and you set up AKS cluster. Um, and then just a quick segue here. Uh, AKS now support the ability to have a standard load balancer instead of a basic load balancer when you create an AKS cluster. So what AKS, when it creates an AKS cluster, it creates VMs behind the scenes, and those VMs sit behind where your nodes are going to be running, sit behind a load balancer. Before there was no choice, it was a basic load balancer. Now it's a standard load balancer. So there is a standard load balancer that is running that basically you can pick a standard load balancer. If you don't pick it, it will be basic. So standard load balancer, as you know, have certain features, which are not supported in the basic load balancer. And if you are using standard load balancer, you can basically lock your API server to just the public IP address of that standard load balancer. So that's what this kind of sample talk about. Second thing it talks about, if you want to use Azure Firewall to block that access to the API server of AKS. So that's also detailed out here. Take a look at it, see if it works. Once again, a big caveat, it's a public preview. So, I don't want to say it, but use it at your own risk. Any questions? Okay, so moving on to another topic that I want to go over, and which is once again for enterprise customer, it's the egress traffic. So if you are running an AKS cluster, the traffic from, before outbound traffic from the VNet where AKS is deployed is all outbound, always open. And a number of security conscious and large enterprise organizations did not like that because they want to control what to make sure that there is no malicious attempt to of attack. They want to reduce the attack radius. So that's where they want to put controls on the outbound traffic. Before there was no kind of list of what domains or IP addresses or tags that AKS nodes need to access. So we can allow those tags to go through an NSG and block the rest of the traffic. So this is kind of what they have provided now is a list of all the outbound addresses and ports that need to access. And you know, so what you can do is based on the type of cluster. For example, if you are doing a Linux cluster, a Linux-based VM or cluster based on Linux VMs, then that list may be slightly different compared to if you are running a cluster based on Windows OS, because they need access. They may need access to different type of registries because since we are running AKS on Ubuntu, it will need access to Ubuntu registry and things like that. On the other hand, if it's running Windows, then it needs access to some of the Windows um, addresses where it kind of needs to access this data to function properly. In any case, once again, this is not something kind of a firewall or a rule or NSG network security group that you can deploy. Not at this point. At this point, it is basically a set of guidelines that you can take a look at with appropriate IP addresses, or not IP addresses, I mean FQDNs and port numbers. You can look at it and you can see what you need to enable and disable depending on the cluster that you are building. So this is the list of all these FQDNs and the port numbers. So you can look at it and see what what will work for you depending on the type of cluster that you are building. Okay. So these are the three items I wanted to kind of discuss. These are the three updates. It happened in the last month and a half. And there are a lot of exciting updates that are on the horizon for AKS, making it a first class managed K8 service. And we will cover it, as they are available. So any question? We have only 2 minutes. So any questions?
Just a quick question, and this is Len speaking again. So
Sure.
this restriction for the egress traffic, right? It is something we need to do it in the firewall. It's not a part of the NSG, correct?
You
Because of the
can do it
FQDN.
at the yeah, exactly. You have to do it on a firewall level. That's right. Yes,
Gotcha. So and then because probably then I would need to do the user-defined routes and pull the force down on my
yeah,
traffic all the way to the firewall. Is it also correct?
that's right. Second
Gotcha.
thing is, I think there is a plan to have service tags available to do some of that. But let's see. I heard about it. I think it was mentioned in one of the conferences. Um, but let's see.
Yeah, that would be just awesome. Okay, thank you so much again. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Okay. Thank you, folks. I hope everybody have a wonderful weekend, and hope to see everyone next week for another session of Azure Power Lunch. Have a good day.